December 27, 1942. Port Moresby, New Guinea. The moment of action arrives. The morning sun made long shadows across the steel runway of Loki Airfield as workers pulled hiding nets off of planes with two tail sections. 12 Lockheed P-38F Lightnings from the 39th Fighter Squadron sat ready with fuel and weapons, their special twin tails shining in the early morning light. A message came from observers on the coast. A big Japanese air attack was forming. Several groups of planes were nearing Buna. Around 40 planes were expected. Fighter plane protection was certain. They had 30 minutes to meet them. You're watching The Valor Unveiled, where the hardest orders forge the greatest courage. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Captain Thomas Lynch looked at his controls and gave the signal to his group. One of his flyers was Second Lieutenant Richard Bong, on loan from another squadron, who were still waiting for their own P-38s to show up. What none of them realized was that this morning would start a huge change in air battles over the Pacific. The Japanese flyers coming toward Buna had only met P-38s for short times in the past weeks. Their information reports were still unsure about what the odd two-tailed fighter could do. In just a few hours, that doubt would turn into stunned awareness. The Japanese Navy's best fighter pilots had ruled the Pacific skies for 13 months. The famous agility of the Mitsubishi A6M0 had become a terrible dream for Allied pilots. It could turn in a tight circle of 950 feet. It could climb to 6,000 feet in 7 minutes and 27 seconds. Its top speed was 331 miles per hour. These numbers had led to huge wins in China and the First Pacific battles. American pilots in their Bell P-39 Airacobras and Curtiss P-40 Warhawks had learned the hard way that trying to outturn a Zero in a fight meant almost sure death. But the P-38 Lightning showed a whole new way of thinking about air combat. It had two Allison V1710 engines, each making 1,150 horsepower. Turbo superchargers kept the power strong at high altitudes, where other planes struggled to perform. Its top speed was 414 mph. It could fly as high as 44,000 feet, and packed in its nose was a powerful set of guns, one 20mm Hispano cannon and four 50-caliber Browning machine guns. All of them fired straight ahead, without the aiming problems of guns mounted on the wings. Lieutenant Richard Bong had memorized these details during his training at Hamilton Field, California. A farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, who'd learned to fly in a non-military program, Bong knew that the Lightning's strength wasn't in turning, with zeros, but in staying away from that kind of fight completely. Speed, height, and firepower. Attack from above, dive through the enemy group, and climb back up high. These methods required control, patience, and a total refusal to follow old-fashioned dogfighting habits. In the approaching Japanese group, experienced pilots from the lay-based air groups flew in their usual protection patterns. The mixed group of Mitsubishi A6M0s, Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, and Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers were the best of Japan's naval air power. These pilots had flown across the Pacific from Pearl Harbor to the Dutch East Indies, hardly ever facing strong resistance. American fighters usually had trouble above 15,000 feet, and their slower climbing speeds made them easy targets. The morning's job seemed ordinary. Protect the dive bombers on their way to Buna, handle any Allied fighter resistance, and fly back to base. Japanese pilots had seen the occasional two-tailed plane in recent weeks, but hadn't understood their importance yet. Some believed they were spy planes or light bombers. The idea that Americans had built a fighter made specifically to cancel out the Zero's strengths hadn't crossed the minds of Japanese planners. But at 18,000 feet, the P-38 group had all the advantages. Captain Lynch led the charge, pushing his Lightning into a dive that quickly went past 400 meters. Behind him, Bong and the other pilots chose their targets. The strong firepower from the Nose-mounted guns let them start shooting from over 400 yards away, much farther than the effective distance of the Zero's lighter guns. Lynch's guns blew up an Oscar on the first pass. The Japanese fighter just fell apart under the force of the 20mm cannon shells and 50 caliber bullets. As Lynch climbed back up, Zero pilots tried to chase him, but found their planes shaking badly as they got close to 400 mph in the dive. Warning bells went off in their cockpits as they neared their plane's structural safety limits. Lieutenant Bong saw a Zero trying to attack Lynch and rolled to take an angled shot. His first burst of fire in combat hit its target, sending the Zero spinning toward the earth in flames. As he pulled up, 3 more Zeros closed in on him. Bong pushed his engine controls forward and dove away, speeding up to over 450 mph. The Japanese pilots could only watch as the strange two-tailed fighter vanished in the distance, totally out of reach. Coming out of his dive just over the treetops, Bong saw a Val dive bomber pulling up from its attack run. A quick burst of fire from 100 yards sent it crashing into the jungle in a fireball. These were Bong's first 2 official victories, the start of what would be the highest-scoring American ace career of the war. The battle took less than 10 minutes. The 39th Squadron reported 12 Japanese planes shot down, including wins by Lynch, Bong, and 2nd Lieutenant Carl Planck. No P-38s were lost. Japanese reports after the fight showed confusion and worry. Pilots talked about planes with unbelievable speed and climbing power, attacking from beyond the usual fighting distance. The comfortable world of turning fights, where Japanese pilots were the best, had suddenly changed into a vertical battleground where speed and height decided who lived. This change sent shockwaves through the Japanese Naval Air Command at Rabaul. Information officers hurried to reevaluate the P-38's abilities. The plane's twin-engine design had made them classify it as a heavy fighter, not good for air-to-air fighting. They hadn't guessed that American engineers had made something brand new. A fighter that was better because of its vertical movement, not its side-to-side nimbleness. The technical breakthrough shown by the P-38 became more and more obvious in later fights. The Lightning's turbo superchargers let it keep full power at heights where normal engines lost half their output. Its diving speed was close to the sound barrier, faster than any Japanese plane could follow without breaking apart. Its power, to turn speed into height, meant P-38 pilots could get back their high position over enemy groups within seconds of an attack. On January 7, 1943, the truth of this new danger became impossible to deny. 9 P-38s protecting bombers over Leh met about 20 Japanese fighters. Normal battle plans would tell the outnumbered Americans to take defensive positions. Instead, the P-38s climbed to 25,000 feet and started diving attacks from places the Japanese couldn't get to. Lieutenant Richard Bong, now flying often with the 39th Squadron while waiting for his own unit's P-38s, showed how deadly the Lightning was. Diving from high up, he took out a Ki-43 Oscar with an angled shot from 300 yards. As Japanese fighters tried to climb toward him, Bong did a climbing turn that took him back to 20,000 feet, completely out of their reach. From this high spot, he picked another target and did it again. The mechanics of vertical fighting was something Japanese pilots had never seen. While a Zero could outturn any American fighter, it couldn't keep up with the P-38's speed in a dive without a disastrous breakdown. It couldn't follow the Lightning's steep climb without stalling. It couldn't catch a P-38 that decided to leave the fight using its greater speed. The level battlefield where Japanese pilots were kings had been swapped for a three-dimensional space where height and speed beat turning ability. Experienced Japanese pilots had trouble adjusting. All their training focused on close-range turning fights, getting behind an enemy through better turning. Against the P-38, these methods were pointless. By the time a Zero pilot got into a shooting position, the Lightning was already a mile away and climbing to altitudes the Japanese fighter couldn't reach. The mental effect was as crushing as the tactical problem. Japanese pilots who had enjoyed a quality advantage since the war started found themselves powerless against an enemy that wouldn't fight by their rules. The strain of always looking up, knowing death could drop from heights they couldn't get to, wore down their spirits. Some pilots started showing signs of battle stress, which was new in Japanese military culture. By February 1943, the number of P-38s in the Southwest Pacific was growing quickly. The 9th Fighter Squadron of the 49th Fighter Group finally got their Lightnings. The 80th Fighter Squadron of the 8th Fighter Group started switching from P-39s to P-38s. The 475th Fighter Group, a unit with only Lightnings, was being put together in Australia. Each new squadron that came had read the battle reports from pilots like Lynch and Bong, improving the tactics that made the most of the P-38's strengths. The training courses set up by squadron leaders stressed the importance of staying at a high altitude above everything else. Altitude is life insurance, became their saying. Speed is life. Pilots learned to fight the urge to turn with enemy fighters, instead keeping up high speed and using vertical moves. The high-speed yo-yo let a P-38 turn extra speed into height while changing direction. The barrel roll attack used the Lightning's fast roll to keep guns on a target while keeping its speed. Japanese efforts to fight these methods were mostly unsuccessful. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony, with its liquid-cooled engine and stronger guns, was made to fight high-altitude American bombers. But even the Tony couldn't match the P-38's performance above 20,000 feet. The Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki focused on speed and climb rate over turning ability, but still wasn't as good as the Lightning. Information reports from Japanese units showed increasing desperation. Pilots were told to stay away from fights with P-38s unless they had a huge number advantage and a better position. Even then, fighting was advised against above 15,000 feet, where the Lightning's performance edge became too great. Some units tried to trick P-38s into low-altitude turning fights. But American pilots had learned to stay disciplined and say no to fights on bad terms. The situation with manufacturing added to Japan's tactical problems. Lockheed's production line in Burbank, California was becoming incredibly efficient. By March 1943, the factory was making 10 P-38s a day. Each plane took about 37,000 work hours to build, but America's industrial power made this effort possible to maintain. Japanese plane production, limited by shortages of materials and bomb damage, had trouble replacing planes lost in battle. Differences in training made the gap even bigger. American P-38 pilots came to the war zone with 300 or more flight hours, including 50 hours in the P-38. They had practiced vertical tactics, shooting, and group flying a lot. Japanese replacement pilots, pushed through shorter training programs, had less than 100 total flight hours on average. Many had never flown above 20,000 feet before meeting P-38s in battle. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea in March 1943 showed the P-38's strategic value. Lightnings flew high above to protect Allied bombers attacking a large Japanese convoy. When Zero escorts came up to stop them, the P-38s used perfect vertical tactics, shooting down many Japanese fighters while stopping any real defense of the convoy. 8 transport ships and 4 destroyers were sunk, a huge blow to Japanese efforts to bring in more troops. Among the P-38 pilots taking control over the Solomons, several names became famous. Captain Thomas Lynch of the 39th Fighter Squadron perfected vertical tactics, eventually getting 20 confirmed victories before he died in March 1944. Lieutenant Richard Bong kept up his amazing scoring run, showing a strange talent for getting his P-38 in the perfect spot for angled shots. In August 1943, a new name joined the list of Lightning aces. Lieutenant Thomas McGuire, part of the new 475th Fighter Group, scored his first victories on August 18th over Wewak. Flying protection for bombers, McGuire's group met about 20 Japanese fighters. In his first battle, McGuire shot down 2 Ki-43 Oscars and 1 Ki-61 Tony. Becoming an ace in just 2 days after adding 2 more victories on August 21st, McGuire's fighting style focused on aggressive vertical moves and accurate shooting. He would later write a guide called Combat Tactics in the Southwest Pacific Area that all pilots in the 5th Air Force had to read. His methods included the McGuire roll, a high-speed barrel roll that kept an attacking position while saving speed, and the vertical reverse, using the P-38's climbing power to switch places with an enemy chasing him. The strategic importance of the P-38's control went beyond single battles. The Lightning's long range, over 1,000 miles with extra fuel tanks, let American planners attack Japanese bases that were thought to be safe. Fighter patrols could reach Rabaul from New Guinea, gaining control of the air before bombers even got there. The ability to escort bombers for their whole mission got rid of the weak spots that Japanese fighters used to take advantage of. On April 18, 1943, the P-38's special abilities made one of the war's most important missions possible. American codebreakers had found out Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's travel plans for a tour of bases in the Solomon Islands. The mission to intercept him would need a 435-mile flight over water from Guadalcanal, perfect navigation with no landmarks, and exact timing to get to the meeting point when Yamamoto's plane flew by. Only the P-38 had the range, speed, and navigation tools for such a mission. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron led 16 Lightnings on the longest fighter interception mission of the war. Flying just above the waves to stay off radar and keeping radio silence the whole time, the P-38s navigated by calculation for over 2 hours. Mitchell's navigation was flawless. At 9:34 a.m., just as planned, Yamamoto's 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers showed up with their 6 escorts. Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr. and Lieutenant Rex Barber rolled in for their attack as the cover team fought the escorts. Barber's focused fire sent the Admiral's bomber crashing into the jungle, killing Japan's most clever naval planner and hitting Japanese morale hard. The mental shock spread through Japan's military leaders. If American fighters could reach across hundreds of miles of ocean so accurately, no one was safe. The idea of Japanese invincibility, already hurt by Midway and Guadalcanal, took another big hit. The P-38 had shown not just better tactics, but a strategic reach that Japanese planners had not expected. After Yamamoto's death, Japanese fighter tactics were desperately changed. Pilots were told to attack P-38s only when they had the height advantage, at least 3 times as many planes, and the element of surprise. Even then, the fight was to be short, with a quick exit if the first attack didn't work. These defensive moves were a complete turnaround from the aggressive style that had defined Japanese fighter plans. The arrival of new Japanese planes didn't fix the balance. The Kawasaki Ki-84 Frank, which came in late 1943, could match the P-38's speed at medium heights, but still couldn't keep up above 25,000 feet. The Mitsubishi J2M Raiden focused on climb rate and high-altitude performance, but gave up range and turning ability. Neither plane showed up in large enough numbers to challenge American air control. By November 1943, the change was complete. Japanese daytime missions over the Solomons had almost stopped. Navy ships moved only in the dark. Supply trips to frontline bases were done by submarines and fast destroyers in quick nighttime runs. The proud Japanese Naval Air Force that had dominated the Pacific in 1941-42 had been cut down to stealthy defensive missions. The numbers told a clear story. In the years since major P-38 operations started, Japanese fighter units in the Solomons and New Guinea had suffered terrible losses. The 251st Air Group, which started 1943 with 80 pilots, had only 10 of its original members left by the end of the year. The 204th Air Group lost 70% of its pilots in 6 months. The 582nd Air Group was pulled from combat completely after losing 80% of its planes in 4 months of fighting against P-38 units. American losses, though real, were manageable. P-38 squadrons usually got kill ratios of 5-to-1 or better. More importantly, American pilots who survived being shot down were often saved by air-sea rescue teams and went back to fighting. Japanese pilots who went down over water usually drowned. American planes damaged in battle were fixed and put back in service. Japanese planes with similar damage were often left behind because of a lack of spare parts. The industrial gap kept getting wider. By December 1943, Lockheed had sent over 2,000 P-38s to war zones. Monthly production was over 400 planes. Japanese production of all fighter types was barely 500 per month, and many of those were kept in Japan for defense. The math of this war of wearing down the enemy had become unavoidable. Training levels became even more different. American P-38 pilots arriving in late 1943 had a lot of training in vertical tactics, flying by instruments, and long-range navigation. Many had practiced fighting against captured Japanese planes, so they knew exactly what their opponents could and couldn't do. Japanese replacement pilots rushed through programs cut from 2 years to 6 months, arrived with very little combat training and no experience against P-38s. The human side of this change should not be ignored. Japanese pilots who had started the war as top warriors, sure of their own skill, found themselves powerless against an enemy they couldn't reach or catch. Letters home found after island battles showed deep discouragement. Some pilots wrote about having nightmares of two-tailed shadows diving from the sun. Others asked to be moved to ground units rather than face P-38s again. American pilots, on the other hand, flew with more and more confidence. The P-38 gave them every edge: speed, height, firepower, and range. They could pick when and how to fight, always keeping control. This mental advantage was as important as the technological one. Confident pilots flew more boldly, took smart risks, and got better outcomes. Richard Bong was a perfect example of this confidence. By April 1944, he had beaten Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 victories. His fighting method had become nearly flawless. Bong would climb to 30,000 feet, far above any Japanese fighter, then choose his targets with care. His attacks were fast, accurate, and deadly. He used, on average, less than 100 bullets per victory, showing amazing shooting skill. Bong's final count of 40 confirmed victories, all in P-38s, showed not just his personal talent but a system-wide advantage. His victims included experienced Japanese aces who just couldn't fight the Lightning's performance strengths. In one battle over Hollandia, Bong shot down 3 Japanese fighters in less than 5 minutes, using perfect vertical tactics that left his enemies unable to fight back. Thomas Maguire pushed the P-38's abilities even more. His guide on combat tactics became the official plan throughout the Pacific. Maguire stressed the value of teamwork, with P-38 groups working together in coordinated vertical scissors moves that trapped Japanese fighters between multiple attacking Lightnings. His final 38 victories between August 1943 and January 1945 proved how deadly well-planned tactics could be. The technical upgrades of the P-38 kept coming through the campaign. The G model had better turbo superchargers that kept power above 30,000 feet. The H model had stronger engines making 1,425 horsepower each. The J model moved the intercoolers to the engine booms, giving the pilot better visibility and high-altitude performance. The L model added power-assisted ailerons that made the roll rate much better. Each new feature tipped the combat balance more in America's favor. The P-38J could fly well at 35,000 feet, heights where Japanese pilots needed oxygen masks just to stay awake. The L model's better roll rate took away the Zero's last small advantage in turning fights. By late 1944, there was nothing a Japanese fighter could do better than a P-38L. Japanese reactions grew more and more desperate. Ramming attacks, seen as honorable, even if wasteful, went up as normal tactics failed. Special attack units got ready for one-way missions. Some pilots tried to trick P-38s into clouds where the confusion might cancel out the Lightning's advantages. These desperate measures had some success now and then, but couldn't change the basic imbalance. The Philippines campaign in late 1944 showed the P-38's fully developed powers. Lightning squadrons took control of the air over Leyte within days of the invasion. Japanese attempts to send in reinforcements by air led to terrible losses. In one fight on November 2, 1944, P-38s of the 49th Fighter Group shot down 26 Japanese planes without a single loss. Such one-sided wins had become common. The strategic bombing of Japanese bases was made possible by P-38 escorts. B-24 Liberators could hit targets all over the Southwest Pacific, knowing Lightning escorts would keep them safe. Japanese interceptors, unable to get to the bombers' altitude when P-38s were there, were left to make useless attacks from the sides. Air bases, fuel dumps, and supply depots were destroyed one by one. The reconnaissance version of the P-38, called the F-5, provided vital information during the campaign. Flying at very high altitudes with cameras instead of guns, these photo-lightnings mapped every Japanese base in the Pacific. Their speed and height made them almost impossible to catch. The information they collected allowed for exact targeting in later attacks. By early 1945, Japanese air power in the Southwest Pacific had basically disappeared. The few remaining skilled pilots had been called back to protect Japan. Replacement pilots with little training and old planes were sacrificed in pointless defensive fights. The P-38 had gained not just air superiority, but complete air control. The difference in human cost was huge. Between December 1942 and January 1945, P-38 units in the Southwest Pacific reported over 1,500 Japanese planes shot down in confirmed battles. American P-38 losses from enemy fire were less than 200 planes. The kill ratio was over 7-1, a number never seen before in air warfare. Beyond the numbers, the P-38's effect was groundbreaking. It showed that better technology, used correctly, could beat a larger enemy with more experience. It proved that air superiority was not about dogfighting, but about controlling the rules of the battle. It showed that industrial power and training systems were just as important as bravery and skill. Veterans from both sides remembered the Lightning with a mix of wonder and respect. American pilots loved its flexibility, toughness, and amazing performance. Japanese pilots remembered it as the plane that ended their reign, the fork-tailed devil that couldn't be caught or escaped. Ground crews liked its solid build and how it could be maintained. Despite its complex systems, the influence went beyond. World War II, the P-38's success shaped fighter design around the world after the war. The idea of vertical fighting became key to jet-age combat. The importance of height and speed over turning ability influenced designs from the F-86 Sabre to today's fifth-generation fighters. The mix of technology, tactics, and training that the P-38 represented became the model for Air Force planning. Lockheed's design team, headed by Clarence Kelly Johnson, had made more than just a successful fighter. They had changed air warfare. The P-38's special design, which came from the need for two engines and turbo superchargers, had given it abilities that single-engine fighters couldn't have. Its focused nose guns got rid of the aiming problems that wing-mounted guns had. Its two engines gave a safety net over the huge Pacific distances. The pilots who flew the Lightning wrote their own part of aviation history. Richard Bong's 40 victories remain the American record for air combat. Thomas Maguire's 38 victories and new tactics shaped fighter plans for years to come. Dozens of other P-38 aces showed that with the right plane and training, American pilots could rule any sky. The Japanese pilots who flew against the Lightning showed amazing courage in a hopeless situation. Flying older planes against a much better technology, they kept fighting long after any hope of winning was gone. Their stories about the P-38's effect give us a priceless historical view on how the air war changed. The physical history is still spread across Pacific Islands. Wrecked P-38s and Japanese fighters are found in jungles and lagoons from New Guinea to the Philippines. Each crash site tells the story of young men who fought and died in a conflict that created the modern world. People living there still find bullets, plane parts, and personal items that show how intense these air battles were. Museums all over the world keep examples of the P-38 Lightning. Restored planes fly at air shows, their special two-tailed shape easy to recognize. Veterans get together to tell stories of missions they flew and friends they lost. Historians keep studying the battles where the Lightning was the deciding factor. The plane that stunned Japanese pilots in 1942 is still a symbol of American aviation success. Modern military plans still use lessons learned in those Pacific skies. Height and speed are still basic to fighter combat. Better technology must be paired with the right tactics and training. Industrial power and supplies decide who can keep fighting. The blend of intelligence, technology, and operations that made the Yamamoto mission possible is still the highest standard for precision attacks. The change from December 1942 to early 1945 was total and could not be undone. The skies that had been the Zeros now belonged to the Lightning. Japanese naval air power, which had started the war as maybe the world's best air force, had been taken apart. The legend of the unbeatable Zero pilot had been broken by American technology and training. In the end, the P-38 Lightning's impact was about more than just winning. It was American industrial democracy's response to military dictatorship. It showed that new ideas could beat tradition, that technology could win over experience, that a superior system could defeat individual talent. The two-tailed fighter that Japanese pilots first ignored had changed air warfare forever. The Solomon Islands campaign, where the Lightning first stunned Japanese pilots, became the place where modern air combat was created. Every jet fighter that came after, every missile fight beyond what the eye can see, every precision attack guided by intelligence can be traced back to those desperate fights over tropical islands. The P-38 didn't just win a campaign. It changed the very idea of air warfare. For the Japanese pilots who made it through, the memory of fighting P-38 stayed sharp for decades. In interviews after the war, veterans described the powerlessness of watching two-tailed shadows diving from heights they couldn't reach. They remembered the frustration of perfect angled shots falling short because the Lightning was just too fast to aim at correctly. They remembered friends and teachers falling one by one to an enemy that changed the rules of the game. American veterans had different memories. They remembered the confidence that came from flying the best fighter in the Pacific. They recalled the good feeling of making perfect diving attacks while staying in full control of the fight. They remembered the comfort of having two engines for safety over huge oceans and the benefit of always being in the higher position. The P-38 Lightning had not just beaten Japanese air power, it had transformed air combat itself. In the skies over the Solomon Islands, between December 1942 and the war's end, the future of air warfare was decided. That future belonged not to the most nimble fighter or the most skilled pilot, but to the country that could create better technology, train good pilots, and keep up long campaigns. By the end of the war, the P-38 Lightning had shocked, discouraged, and finally wiped out Japanese air power in the Pacific. The two-tailed fighter that Japanese pilots had learned to dread had systematically taken away their ability to fight for control of the skies. In doing so, it had guaranteed American air superiority and sped up the end of the Pacific War. The revolution, it started in those desperate battles, continues to shape air warfare today, a lasting tribute to American innovation and the bravery of the pilots who flew the Lightning into history.